Hi, I'm Professor Jason Leggett, and I will be your instructor for American Legal System, otherwise known as courts. This course also has a different name at John Jay. It's called the Judiciary. So I think I might just start there. This course has kind of gone through a few different variations, and so the two kind of main things that CUNY wants you to understand about this particular course relates to first the idea that the judiciary or judges, the court system, are not separate from the political system. And so hopefully you kind of learned that in your POL 51 or American Government class if you hadn't learned that already. But to not see it as part of so-called the criminal justice system, but rather to see it as a different system that has a relationship with the criminal justice system. And I will explain that more as the semester goes on. The second thing that this course is really about is about legal research. So it's about conducting research, which you do in English 12 and other classes. But in this class, it's a different type of research. Obviously, it's legal research, and so there's a lot of different terms and then different ways of thinking about law that you have to do in this class that you don't do in sociology, in philosophy, or in English. So it's a little bit different, but I think you'll get the hang of it as we go through it. So a little background is that I've taught this class now for 12 years, and I think this semester what I've tried to do is make it easier for students to do legal research and learn about complicated legal systems through this new online environment. So I've adopted some of the things that I tried last semester when we switched, but I think what I did is make it a little bit simpler. So the content is obviously not simple. So I'd say that off the bat, right? Like I think some students take this class and they're expecting it to be like Intro to Criminal Justice, Crime and Punishment, right, or even policing. But and those are great courses, but they're single item courses, right? So you're really just looking at one or two things. In law, especially when we're looking at it as a system, you really have to look at sometimes 10, 15, 20 things depending on kind of what you're interested in. So we'll talk about Black Lives Matters and then also about policing in this class. So one of that Black Lives Matters is a social movement, right? So you might study that in sociology, whereas policing you'd study in criminal justice or in the policing class. But we're going to study that in relationship with the political system and how the courts kind of operate in that system. So I just want to give you a little bit of background so you have an understanding of where we're going. The simplest part of this presentation is this is the website. So I'd prefer that you save this somehow, whether it's in a Google Doc or whether you bookmark it in your favorite browser. And by the way, the school asks that you use Mozilla Firefox, if that's convenient for you. If you're a Mac user, you can use Safari and then set your search to a different search if that makes you feel better. I don't really care, right? The website will work on any browser, and that's kind of the point of using this. And as you can see, it's part of the City University. They offer this to us to use, and so I use it along with other folks. So this is where I'm going to keep all of our information. I will use Blackboard announcements so that those of you who are on Blackboard already for another class, you can go to our class shell and look at the announcements and keep track of information that way. And that also is supposed to go to your preferred email address, whatever you gave to the college. So I just wanted to kind of put this in your mind that this is the main place to go. Sometimes students get a little bit confused about that, and I just want to make sure that you understand that. If you have questions, right, you can always email me. And so that's the information here. The website is also an interactive syllabus, right? So instead of getting a Word document or whatever that it has all the same information on as every other class, this is only about our class. So you've got my email address there, you've got my personal website if you want to know more about my life and what I do. Of course, you could always Google me, right? And then, the course materials, I'm going to say two things about this, right? So one is, this is a commonly used book within legal studies courses. It is a somewhat difficult book in the sense that it is particular to law, so there's a lot of legal language. Again, we're going to be going over that information, so I don't think it'll be too difficult for you, right? Like you'll struggle a little bit, but then it'll get easier as you kind of go through it. Sometimes students ask, and I want to give an honest answer here, do you have to buy the book? I mean, first, it's as cheap as $9 on Amazon, so I don't think cost is an issue here. It's not a $120 textbook like other legal classes or criminal justice classes. I think you need it. I refer to it a couple times. I'll probably refer to it quite a bit as we go through the process. But if you want to take your chances, I think you could pass the class. I don't think you would fail it for not getting the book. So I want to be honest, right? So I think it'd be easier to pass the class with the book. But if you are not able to get the book, I don't want you to drop the class or have a panic attack, right? I will be providing information from the book. So if you get information that way, I think that's fine. I'm not going to be difficult with people on this issue. I think it's a book that you will probably want to get if you are interested in law. But if you're just taking this class to get the credit, then you could save the $10 to $30, to be honest. So the learning outcomes are pretty simple, I think. And then I'm going to give you a little information about our common kind of project, because this is a project-based course. And so I think you should be a little bit familiar, if you've taken any other criminal justice classes or even political science classes, with the language of law, right? Stare decisis, mens rea, etc., right? If those are brand new terms, you don't freak out, right? We'll talk about those. I don't think we'll talk about mens rea, but you never know. But I also, the language of law is one thing. Like, if you look it up in, say, Black's Law Dictionary, or you go to the Cornell Legal Institute or whatever, right? That's the text of law. But then there's the language that lawyers use. And, as a graduate of law school and then briefly a quote-unquote practicing lawyer, and perhaps I'll talk more about what that means. Only in America is that even a thing you have to say. I'm a legal scholar, so there is a difference, right? So some of the thinking and the talking from scholars is different than practicing lawyers. But that's also true depending on where lawyers are practicing. I worked in a general practice and then worked on writing appeals briefs for a long time. So I think, that language, writing an appeals brief for a judge, is different than writing a business document for a corporation, which is, 80% of lawyers, that's the field they go into. And so I think just trying to make that sensible to you all and understanding that there are political dynamics that go with that, especially when we talk about radical lawyers. They're using more sociological language, and so there's just different ways of using legal language, and that's kind of the point there. On the other hand, courts are pretty restricted by their socialization, by their education, but also as their professional standards, and the fact that many of them can get removed by legislatures and in some cases by the voters, right, through initiatives and referendums. So I think, just trying to understand that there's some ambiguity or differences between courts as judges and lawyers who go to court and then lawyers who do not go to court is the main point I want you to get there. The second one is really the main point of this class, which is the judicial processes. And I'm giving you this from a hands-on point of view. I've tried assigning research papers on this process, but that doesn't go well unless you've had good you've been well prepared by, let's say, English 24, or you've been in very specific professors' classes in the criminal justice program. So just off the top of my head, if you've taken Chris Chapman or Carlene Barnaby or Grace Trotman, then I think you probably would do well in a research-based class. But if you had, if this is your first criminal justice class, or if you're a liberal arts student, which some of you are, right, you might not be used to this. And so I don't want to throw that kind of thing at you. So we're going to do a low-stakes writing assignment where you'll explore from the same point of view as a judge, how these processes all work, so that you can kind of, I'm hoping you get the feeling that you're in a political environment, because judges are, right? And they try not to make their decisions based on that, but that's impossible, right, in reality. But it's not impossible to try to check your bias, right, to try to follow a certain, what's called a canon in law. And so I'm trying to help you see that without having you commit to this kind of 12-page research paper that, frankly, you'll have to do if you transfer to John Jay, but you don't have to do that yet, right? I want to get you kind of ready and prepared to do that work as you transfer. So I did a similar project last semester, but it was a little too big, I think. And so this one's a lot smaller, and there'll be more creative aspects for those of you who, kind of dread doing research. Hopefully this will be more fun and interesting. It'll certainly be more fun and interesting for me to do with you. And then finally, probably the most complicated part of what I'm asked to do in this class is teach you about the interrelationship of legal thinking, which is called abduction, and other governmentalities. And that's a term that comes from Michel Foucault, a philosopher in the 1960s that has become wildly popular. If you've seen the movie 13th, or read the new Jim Crow or Just Mercy, this is kind of an understanding that folks in the legal world have, meaning that governmentalities is different than government, right? Government you study in class, and you've got like a picture of the quote-unquote checks and balances and all that kind of fun stuff. But in reality, right, governmentalities are how do you use those things, right? Like, how do you use the presidency? Obviously, Donald Trump uses the presidency different than Barack Obama did. And so you can kind of see governmentalities is, again, how do you use those institutions? How do you use those instruments of power? And what does that say about the way you see the world or your ideology? And I want you to be able to see this within this concept called the social construction of reality, meaning, when we're talking about something like law or the courts or judicial processes, we are not talking about apples. We are not talking about a sports car. We are not talking about a physical product, right? We're not talking about the force of gravity. We're not talking about thermodynamics or something you learned in a physics class, right? We're not talking the parts of a cell, something you learned in a biology class. In other words, we're not talking about real things, right? We're talking about things that are created because we believe in them and we talk about them and we behave as if they're real. And so that's called the social construction of reality. I want you to understand that we could easily make other choices. We could change our legal system. We could make little things inside of the legal system more fair, equitable, etc. And I just want you to understand that kind of what we call in the legal scholars call malleability, or the ability to change it. So if you think of like Play-Doh or clay, right? This is the idea. Law is like that, right? So I just want you to kind of get that in your head now. But I'm not going to really be assessing you or grading you on that third learning outcome until much later in the semester. So I'll be guiding you along. And then to help us get there, we're going to be looking at the structure and the history of the legal system, and we're going to investigate that in the same way that you would think about maybe a detective doing that. So the structure means these kind of relationships we have and the norms. So if you learn that law is society agreed upon norms, right, we're going to deconstruct that, we're going to interrogate that, we're going to question whether that's reality and whose norms are we talking about. And we're going to look at power dynamics, right? So who gets to make up the laws, who has to follow the laws, who gets to get away with breaking the laws, etc. And then the historical, I'm sure you understand that phrase, right? So we'll be looking at how has this developed over time with some idea of like thinking, how might this go in the future, even though obviously, right, in this time, both with COVID and the Black Lives Matters movement and the counter-revolution, right? So you've got this kind of Trump progressive reaction. It's hard to say what's going to happen in the future. So our question is really like thinking about, so how can social groups apply knowledge from previous generations to use law as a tool for justice and equity or change? So I think like the easiest place to start would be the civil rights movement, because that's the most widely talked about social groups using the law to make change. But conservatives have used the law to make change through the judiciary, right? By appointing conservative judges who are anti-abortion, who are pro-religion in the schools, kind of all these kind of things we'll go through in later if you're interested. So you could also go back to the late 1800s and see this populism and progressive movements then. So there's different time periods where you see different groups using knowledge from the past to apply it differently. So this all kind of comes from England being the source of this particular legal system that we use today. And so you learn a little bit about that, but not too much. So overview and rules of the game. We're required to ask you about, or we're required to make sure that you're going to continue in this class, or we're supposed to drop you. So basically, there's a assignment right at the very beginning. It's not a heavy, difficult assignment that I just need you to complete as soon as you possibly can. So preferably within the next few days. And I'll probably annoy people through Blackboard and email to get this done if they're not doing it. But I have to tell you, right, if you don't complete this assignment, then I do have to drop you. So this is like urgent, and you don't need the book to complete this assignment. Okay, moving on from that boring subject to the next boring subject. Probably not for you, but for me. So this is not a read and take multiple choice kind of class. I'm going to say it again. This is not a read and take a multiple choice kind of class. Like I said, this is a legal research class. It's a project-based class. This is supposed to be able to help get you ready. As it says in CUNY First, this class was designed for and is intended for pre-law students. You don't have to be interested in going to law or committed to that point yet, but it would be like taking an introduction to nursing class and you're not interested in nursing, right? So that class is not going to tailor to you. It's going to tailor to the largest group of people. That said, I tried to make this class as interesting to everyone as possible. So even if you were an environmental engineering student, I would be trying to meet your needs too. But what this means is like you're not getting a textbook, doing a reading, and pretending like you learned something because you answered C on a multiple choice quiz, right? Which is like the easiest thing for teachers to grade. That's why they do it. But there's no measurement of your learning. So what we find out later, those of us who are involved in helping out the administration and making sure that students are actually doing well and passing their classes, is that when students go to John Jay or they transfer to another school like Baruch, they do very poorly because those schools don't emphasize multiple choice exams. Then I just throw this out there as like lawyers don't take multiple choice exams. So it's like you need to be able to reason, right, to think critically and to write, and that's what this class is about. So my point here is like, don't harass me, right? Like I am the messenger. Don't tell me how this class is different than some other class. Save that for somebody else, right? Feel free to talk about me behind my back, but I don't need to hear it. I understand this isn't new information. If this is like a class that you absolutely don't want to take, talk to your advisor and take a professor that you want to take, right? I prefer to have students who want to take this class, and I usually get a lot of repeat students. So they like the way I teach, they want to take the class, and if you get out of the class, they'll take the class. So I'm not saying that you should, right? I think you should be open to new ways of learning. I sound like Dr. Chris Chapman there, but I agree with him. So I think you should try different methods, but I just want to kind of get that out of the way right at the very beginning. I expect more of you than to be able to repeat information that you found in a textbook. And I hope you expect more of me to do my job and get paid for it. So grading will be based on a number of assignments. So I still kind of try to design assignments that help keep you going and give you the kind of feedback that you need. I prefer having a conversation with you, which is obviously, well, actually I'm torn on this, right? Very few students would actually come to office hours when we were in person for a variety of reasons, or talk to me after class. But those students always did better, right? Because we had a conversation about how they're doing. We can do that over Zoom, and I think we should, especially this class. I always worry about this class because students tell me that they're afraid of doing research. So I don't want you to be afraid of doing research, and I want you to do well. So especially since they've capped the class at 29, it does give me a little bit more time to talk with you individually. I'll also be doing kind of group-based Zoom sessions and Q&A sessions, and I'll have little Google Forms checking in on you and then answering those questions in a video presentation like this one. So I think you're going to get a lot of feedback, and now I'm just going to talk about how are these assignments broken up. So I see them as major assignments and secondary assignments. Not that the secondary assignments are less important, But the major assignments, this is organized around the project. So the project is around something called a zine. I provide information on the website to look up what a zine is. I mean, in short, it's actually, it's basically a creative project about a subject that you're interested in, obviously related to law and social change. In the past, when I have project-based classes like this, students will look at racial injustice, gender injustice, environmental injustice, issues with children in prison, citizenship questions, immigration, right? There's so many different projects that you can work on. I don't think I've ever said no to anyone who wanted to work on something. So, this is up to you, basically, because I think I've found out from students that this is the best way that most students learn. You are interested in something, you do some research, and then you get to have some creativity on how you present that information. For those of you who I just scared you to death, right, you can do a very simple zine, right, and it can look similar to a website or similar to what I used to call, a cheat sheet, a one-page, just what is the information that you've learned, put it on that sheet. But I encourage you to be as creative as you want to be. So we could do video formats, we could do art, installations. Like there's a million different things you could do based on what you feel like doing. And I will go over that later in the semester because we're not really going to start working on that until October, mid-October. So the secondary assignments are like, I give you some content, I want to see whether you understand it, and I'm going to get it back from you so I can understand where you are at in that process. It's not a check yes or no kind of thing. It's saying, okay, you got abductive reasoning about 60%, right? I don't want to give you a D because it's a difficult thing, but I want to be able to identify where are students struggling and how can I help you get further along. And that's what these assignments are for. So the 10-point assignments are most likely, in most situations, going to be you get the 10 points or you don't. And I'm probably going to let you take them more than once. But let's see how things go, and we'll kind of check in. And that's kind of my big point for this whole conversation that I'm having with you here is let's see how things go. Let's not commit to too much too fast. Let's just take a couple weeks, settle in, and reassess at this point. Because again, this is a difficult class, and this is a difficult situation, so I want to be able to help you through this. I will also provide cumulative grades, meaning like I'll show you in a second how many points are total, right? But if you have like 60 points up to the point of 30 points, I'll let you know where you're at in that process, just to make it a little bit easier for you, right? I don't normally do that, and I don't really believe in it, but I just want to make things as easy for you as possible. Since you didn't necessarily sign up for this class to be online, right? You did that because this is our only option. So the final exam is going to be kind of collaborative in the sense, right? You're going to be building up to it, which in theory will make it easier if, as my professor says, like, if you do the work, the final exam will be pretty easy. You're going to work in a pair, and I'm going to let you choose whether you'd rather work with one person or you'd rather work in like 2 or 3 people. And I know some of you are going, oh, I hate group work. I understand, right? And we'll talk about it, and you can Zoom me, and we'll get through it. But this is the part of education that's like really missing right now. And just as a side note, I might talk about this again. I'm helping my sister homeschool now my 7-year-old niece. And I used to teach for a few years, long ago, in elementary schools. And what I'm seeing from her, even though we're related, right, and in some ways that's easier to get the information to her, she's missing all that social exchange that goes on. And study after study after study after study shows that that's how people learn. It's kind of common sense if you sit around thinking about it, but I want to make that painless, right, to do this, and so we'll make it simple. And if it just becomes impossible, then we'll figure out something else to do. But we should try it, and some of you will do, better work because you're exchanging information with other people. But again, I don't want you to be stressed out about this, and it will only be part of your grade, not the whole thing. But it is an important skill to learn, especially if things don't change soon, right? If we have to, more and more people will start doing group work through Zoom. and possibly through Blackboard, although there are great amounts of problems with Blackboard. But it's pretty straightforward, I think, if you're reading right now. And, I don't, you're just going to be looking at somebody else's work, and then you can have a little conversation with them, and then you're basically analyzing what is the difference between the two and what does that tell you about different perspectives of what the law means. And then I'm going to be offering Zoom question and answer sessions like throughout the semester. I might do one or two like little lectures and just record them so I can talk with you, but that kind of depends on two things. If I show up to these things and none of you have your videos on, your screens on, then I'm not going to do any lectures because it's just too weird looking at a bunch of blank faces. If you want to put a picture up of you, that's great. If you want to put an avatar up of you, that's fine, right? Like on one session I did an Alice in Wonderland scene, kind of to be funny, but also to kind of challenge the people I was, Zooming with. But there's just nothing weirder than talking to a screen of empty faces, to be honest with you. So I prefer that you have your video on so I can see you. If that's just not going to happen with you, or if you're having like a bad day that day, or if you're in your car, right? I mean, some people have had Zooms with me in the car, and it was pretty fun looking out the window with them. But you could just put a picture of yourself up, and I don't care, within reason what it looks like. And then, again, you could do an avatar, just do some random picture of something, again, within reason, right? Remember, there are laws that apply here, and you could get reported if you do anything against those laws. And then final grades will be posted on CUNY first during finals week, right? I think that's probably common sense, but we won't, you won't have to email me to find out how you're doing. So the course outline I've divided into 3 parts. The first thing you have to do, again, is that attendance verification. So I've got that in the course outline too, just to remind you. And then as you see, like, some students, I'm trying to like get better at explaining this, but it's like some students like, oh, there are no due dates. Okay, interesting, right? So I see part 1, weeks 1 through 4, September 12th to October 10th, and then there's a list of things that you're supposed to do. In my mind, you would do those things between September 12th and October 10th. So the due date, right, if you're a super procrastinator, is you had to get everything done by October 10th. But then, like, I look at the page, and I have different options here for you. So if it has a hard deadline, if it says, like, you must do it by October 15th or October 20th, that's obviously the deadline. So if you're like, okay, so but when should I do this reading? Well, why wouldn't you do it now? I don't understand. So I'm not going to tell you when you need to do the readings, and that's for 2 reasons. One, I've been teaching online for a long time, and I took online classes myself. The best online classes are the ones that accommodate to students who have difficult schedules. So some of you are going to want to do this work, as I've seen, at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I'm not going to have a deadline that says you have to turn this in at 5 p.m. if you're going to do the work at 2 a.m. I'd rather you just do the work. So I give you a block of time to do this on your own schedule. The second reason is that I know you're taking classes where people have those hard deadlines. So I want you to focus on those hard deadlines and then come back to my work, even if my work's more fun. I just want to give you time and space to think. That's what this class is. It's a thinking class. It's not, like I said, looking something up in a textbook and then putting the answer. That you need to do by 4:30 p.m. on a Thursday, do that, right? And then work on my class. Most of the time, if you turn something in late, that's okay. I'm not going to punish you. Everything's fine. The reason why there are due dates is I think this is the amount of time it would take to do this work based on my experience with students. If you get behind, as you know, it gets harder and harder to catch up. But, I've been doing this a long time. I can help you. We can work something out. So don't quit, right? Don't drop off from the face of the earth. Don't, have a panic attack. Just let's work it out. We'll Zoom, right? Or email or whatever we need to do to make sure that you get back on track, because I care about those learning outcomes I gave you at the front. And these are just some ways of getting there. So at the beginning, you're going to just go through 3 basic kind of legal positions, right? So the first one is a historical document so that you better understand kind of what were the English bases for the American legal system. And it's the kind of phrase I want you to be thinking about, something called natural law. And I'm going to be kind of talking about that in contrast to positive law. And so the English tradition was based in natural law. Up until the 1930s, the United States was definitely based in that system, and then now there's competition with this thing called positive law, which largely comes out of economics. Then we have, the Judiciary Act, and this is what kind of sets up the system. So I don't think you need to read that closely, but I just wanted you to be aware of this is, Congress creates the courts, and then the courts have their own kind of system, and that's what creates that political environment. That's why when you kind of see the news talking about, oh man, this president is applying or is appointing a political judge. Well, yeah, no kidding, and that's how it's always been. So I don't mind when people say, well, I wish it wasn't that way. Sure, right. I wish lots of things were different. But the political system was designed to be political, and so I want you to get the sense of that in the Judiciary Act, and so you understand that. And there's lots of legislation that's come out after that. The Patriot Act being probably the most important one of my generation. And then, I want you to read a Law and Society article about the Black Lives Matters movement, because this is the framework that we're going to be working in, right? There's this super important thing going on. There's lots of reactions to it. It's very much prevalent on our campus and in the conversations that I'm having with other faculty, and with the president of our college is very interested, right? There's all these kind of aspects to it. Obviously, in New York, it's a big deal. I'm recording right now in Seattle, where it's a big deal. So I think just thinking about how we can kind of have a legal lens on this will be important as we kind of think about what is the purpose of the legal system. Then you're going to kind of just do your first thought paper, which is actually your only thought paper. I don't know why I put first, but it's that's your first assignment basically. So you're going to read those 3 things, you're going to think about them, and then you're going to answer the questions. You're going to write 3 pages. I don't care. I don't care. I'm not grading you down about grammar, spelling, punctuation. I just want you to kind of refer back to these so I have a better understanding of how you're learning about this kind of introduction. And then we'll do a Q&A, and I'll provide that information based on feedback I get from you, but closer towards the end of that, weeks 1 through 4. So, probably somewhere around October 5th or so, we will have a check-in, and I'll just answer your questions about the readings, about the assignments, and hopefully we'll get a little bit clearer on just that first part. So it'd be very similar to what we would do in a classroom, where we're just kind of like, okay, this is what you were supposed to do. What did you get out of it? And then I'll post grades based on that first paper by October 20th on Blackboard in the grade thing, whatever it's called. So part 2, we're going to switch over and now think very clearly about, let's deconstruct this idea of the purpose of the legal system. So that's where you first will read The Politics of Rights, just in case you didn't get the book. Now, obviously you could read this earlier if you want to. So I want you to start with chapter 12, where he really summarizes kind of the whole study. And then you should go back and start at the beginning of the book and work at your own pace. I think if you read, 5 pages a night, that'd be awesome, right? But some of you will want to read 30 pages over the weekend. That's fine too. But read this like it was like a book, right? Read this like it was like a novel, right? Read it a little bit at a time. And again, I'm open to, if you want to set up a Zoom and talk about it, that'd be great. That'd be awesome. That's kind of what the whole point of teaching is. But just work your way through it, right? Especially if you have questions about the vocabulary, right, the language, or how it kind of relates to the here and now. And if you're super interested in this and you want just some extra credit, there's a review article by a professor from College of Staten Island that's a colleague of mine, and I would provide that information to you, the article he wrote, and then you'd write kind of a review of those 2 things. So let me know if you're interested in that, or if you want to do that for honors enrichment. And then you'll start, in this news, like this part 2, you're going to start thinking about your zines and how you're going to present the information that you're learning. And I'm going to kind of do 2 things at once. I'm just going to have you start thinking about the zine, brainstorming about it, how that relates to conflict resolution, like what is the issue that you're really concerned about and thinking about, and you'd like to see law be used as social change for it. And then I'm going to break these assignments, these little 10-point assignments, down into very clear video lectures, and then you'll take a Google form. And I want to see, like, how are you doing with the language? How are you doing with the usage? How are you doing with the grammar and the context of law? And then are you able to take this reasoning and apply it to a situation? And so that's just kind of like, again, it's probably something we do in class together with like worksheet style work, and you'd probably be able to work, with a peer or something. So, and that's fine by me, by the way. Like, if you find somebody that you like or know in this class, and you're able to, use technology to be able to do that, and you're social distancing and everything, then by all means, do the work together. But part 2 will then, as you see, you're just kind of transitioning. So we had some introduction. Now we're going to get a little bit deeper into the subject. And then we're going to start coordinating, right? And this is the part that will be difficult at first, so let's be patient and we'll figure out how to do it. But you're basically not going to be doing too much work together. The main thing you're going to do, if you just look down at number 9, is you're going to be making a table, right? And so I just, you could use a spreadsheet, or you could do it, on a piece of paper with lines. But we're just going to, what I'm hoping that we can do is we want to really look at what are called narratives. We want to look at our language, right? So how do you see the law? How does your peer group see the law? If we want to get super into this, we'd start looking at like media representations, like how are people using legal language differently? And so we want to present that. So my idea here is you'll send this information to me, and then I'm going to re-present it to you in a video lecture like this. And I'll do some analysis of what we're seeing so that you kind of get the hang of this. Now, that will be similar to the article you read on Black Lives Matters. And so hopefully you'll start getting good at this as we go into part 3. And again, we'll do Zoom questions and answers to try to make sure everybody's on the same page. And if you can't make that, you can email me and we can set up our own Zoom, because I know many of you are working. So I will work around your schedule. So then part 3 is where we're just going to kind of finish our work. So this is going to be middle of November to that beginning part of December. So it's only 2 or 3 weeks where I'm just trying to get you to take what you've done, get it organized, and then put it into a presentable manner. And so there's 2 assignments that are just making sure that you get that this is a process, right? Judicial processes, remember, in the learning outcome, and that it's a system, right? That the legal system is part of the larger political system. So I just want to make sure you get those 2 learning outcomes down. There's some extra credit opportunities if you want to take those, if you want to boost your grade. Or again, if you want to do an honors enrichment contract, this would be the work that you do. And then there's applied action research. What I already kind of told you about is this last part is you're just going to take the system, the process that we've been learning, and we're just going to apply it towards the end, and we're going to see what we come up with. So hopefully you get your information to me quickly, and then I can present it back to you so you can see what we've learned. You are going to need to do an interview of what I call an ordinary folk, which is a non-lawyer, non-criminal justice person. It can be anybody, and it can be any age. But what you want to do is just, beforehand, you want to think about you want to just get a little information about them. So let's say it's Grandma, and Grandma lived in Georgia in 1963. I might say something like, well, Grandma, were you aware of the civil rights movement at that time? And see what she says, right? And then I'd say, well, what kind of stuff were you doing? Did you have a job? What kind of music did you like? Like, get a little bit more about who she was as a person. And then what you want to do is come up with a hypothesis. Say, do I think Grandma's going to use language about the civil rights movement based on, say, like her musical references, right? Is she going to borrow language from those songs? Is she going to do it from her church experience, right? Is it going to be from her time working at the factory, like whatever, right? And I just made all that up. So I think that's what we want to kind of see is how well does the legal language match up to people's lived experiences, and from that wondering, okay, where are people getting their legal language information from? And that's how we're going to have a better sense of how judges use the information and how they apply it in the criminal setting and how they apply it in what's called the civil setting. And I'm going to try to get that separated for you because criminal trials are actually a very small percentage of the legal system. So I want to try to make sure that we kind of get all of that. I think it'll be a challenge, but if we've stayed on track and we've done our work, I think it'll all come together rather nicely. And then I'm really looking forward to seeing your presentations on the Zooms. I want to keep these very low key, right? So you don't need to do a PowerPoint presentation. It's literally, I just want you to jump onto Zoom, probably with 4 or 5 other people. You'll just talk about the zine. What is it saying? What is the narrative that you found, right? What did you learn from this process, and what did these people say? And what did they learn, right? Did they learn anything from the interview? So you can go back and ask them, like, now that you've thought about my questions, like, do you want to change anything? And I think what we're really trying to get at is, like, how does lived experience with law and narratives apply to these current kind of struggles that we're in right now, whether it's COVID, Black Lives Matters, the election coming up, global warming, like all these different things. Like, how does this apply? And then there's just I'll do one, offer you one more extra credit opportunity where you just write what's called an academic review of the book, the book Politics Rights. And then, if you want to compare this to some other book, and I don't really care what the book is, then I'll give you extra credit. And then I'll have a little rubric just so you can see like how you'll get the points. And again, you could do that if you wanted to do it as extra credit or an honors enrichment contract. And then the final exam will kind of build off the work that you've done, and then you'll just apply the learning. You'll make a quick zine. It won't have to be as, it could be as nice as the one that you make for your project, but the point is I want you to use the learning experience you had from making a zine again, right? Show me that you now can compress this information into a format that is better for more people, right? More people could understand and get something out of it. And then I want you just to compare it to one other zine, because what we're looking here, and I'm not saying like one's better than the other, that's not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is like, how are these different, right? How are these presentations about law teaching us different things about how people use law? And then final grades will be up by the end of finals week, right? And I don't know that date yet. I'm still waiting to find out when that will happen. Sometimes we get that information about a month in, so probably sometime in October. But you never know in these COVID times. So just to review, it's a project-based course, okay? So be patient and do your work slowly, take your time. I'm more interested in content and quality over quantity. The zine is a creative interpretation of the law, so I want you really to, tap into your creative side. For those of you who say you're not creative, let's Zoom and talk, and let's see, maybe you are. And if you're super not creative, then we can figure out, some format for you to put it in that's similar to the zine. And then the Google Forms are really, if you complete those on time, it really allows me to monitor your learning. I can really, if you're struggling, I can come in and say, okay, I see where you're struggling. Let's think about this. I might give you some additional resources. And if you're doing really well, then I can say, hey, you don't need to worry about these assignments. Let's push you off into this other one, or why don't you do this extra credit assignment instead of these assignments? So I really like to use those as a form of feedback. So we can Zoom. We'll do it on Q&As. Like I might do a couple lectures, like I said, if you all turn on your videos. And, because I'm not going to do a lecture, like, lecture. I'm going to do an interactive lecture where let's talk to each other and learn something. And so I don't want to do that to a blank screen. I don't mind doing it to Minnie Mouse or whatever, right? That's fine. An avatar is okay, as long as I get to do an avatar too. And so I think just having that interaction is the thing we're missing. It's the thing I like. It's the thing that almost most students complained about last semester in their end of term reviews. They thought the class was okay, but they missed that part. So let's try to see what we can do about it. And again, the group work is thinking about social change, and you're participating in social change because you're thinking about injustice in the law. And again, if you're having troubles with your partner or you're having troubles with your group, we can Zoom, right? I don't want tattletaling, obviously, but if you're just really hitting a wall, then you're hitting a wall, right? And so we'll figure out what to do. So I think my point here is that I'm accessible, and I want you to do well. So let's just try and focus on that. And again, if you have any questions, you can email me in the short term. Thank you very much.